In September 2025, Nepal exploded. Tens of thousands of young people, mostly students, flooded the streets of Kathmandu. They weren't just chanting or waving signs. They were setting government buildings on fire, clashing with the police, and in some cases, dying.
Yesterday night was super scary.
That's all around PM office. Everything is burning around Kathmandu.
By the end of the week, more than 50 people were killed, over 1,300 injured, and Nepal's Prime Minister had resigned.
The Prime Minister of Nepal has resigned as deadly protests continue across the country.
Nepal isn't usually in the global headlines. It's a small Himalayan nation of 30 million people, sandwiched between two giants, India and China. When we think of Nepal, we usually think about the mountains, Mount Everest, maybe tourism. Not this. Not street battles that leave the country's biggest airport shut down, ministers fleeing in helicopters, and even the wife of a former prime minister severely beaten and recovering from an arson attack. So what happened here? Why did Nepal's Gen Z, a generation raised in a fragile democracy, suddenly begin bringing their country to the brink of collapse? And more importantly, what does this tell us about a bigger global pattern of young people rising up against the old, corrupt systems? The spark was this.
Down on a number of social media platforms including Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, Reddit.
Last Thursday, the Nepalese government announced a sweeping ban on social media. Not one or two apps, 26 platforms gone overnight. WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, and even smaller messaging apps all blocked. Officially, the government said it was about misinformation, too many fake accounts, online scams, platforms not following regulations. But most people didn't buy that explanation, because banning almost every major communication tool in the country without warning felt less like regulation and more like censorship. And here's the thing, in a different moment, people probably would have just complained, switched to VPNs, and moved on. But Nepal wasn't in a different moment. By the time this ban was announced, frustration with the government had already reached a boiling point. Years of corruption, unemployment, and political instability had left young people, especially, feeling hopeless. So when the government pulled the plug on social media, it wasn't just about apps, it was about control, and this was the final straw. On Monday morning, tens of thousands of students poured into the streets. At first, it looked like a peaceful demonstration, but the government's response changed everything. They sent in riot police, water cannons, tear gas, rubber bullets, and eventually, live ammunition. By the end of the day, dozens of students were dead, most from chest and head injuries. It was the bloodiest day Nepal had ever seen since the end of the civil war in 2006. And once blood was spilled, the protests didn't calm down. They escalated. Protesters set fire to government buildings, even the parliament itself. Ministers' houses were attacked. One former prime minister's wife was severely injured in an arson attack. She was thought deceased at first, but newer reports claimed that she is in Nepal's burn center. The capital, Kathmandu, spiraled into chaos. Curfews were imposed. The country's biggest airport shut down, and for a moment, it looked like the government was losing control of the state. Okay, so the government banned social media, protests explode, and suddenly, the streets of Kathmandu are on fire. But let's be clear, this wasn't just about WhatsApp or Instagram. That was the match, the fuel that had been piling up for years. There are a few reasons why young Nepalese, especially Gen Z, were already furious. Reason 1, corruption. According to the surveys, 84% of Nepalis believe corruption is one of the country's biggest problems. And they're not wrong. Government projects here are notorious for embezzlement. Take the International Airport project. On paper, it should have been a proud milestone. In reality, 71 million vanished into the pockets of politicians and contractors. And yet, very few officials ever face consequences. In 2021, Nepal's government quietly greenlit a land swap with the Giridi Bandhu tea estate in Jawapa, exchanging 343 bighas of prime estate land for state property. Critics immediately smelled a deal designed to benefit powerful insiders like businessman Deepak Malhotra and influential political figures. In December 2025, The former Prime Minister Pushpa Kamal Dahal faced intense scrutiny when it emerged that telecom giant Ncell underpaid over NPR $10 billion in taxes. The revelation sparked widespread outrage and demands for accountability, exposing serious gaps in government oversight. Early 2024, investigations ramp up as media and opposition's pressure intensifies, and in 2025, ongoing court cases and calls for tougher corporate tax enforcement dominate headlines. And it's not just the under-the-table money type of corruption. Young Nepalis are fed up with poor schools and weak healthcare. Transparency International has ranked Nepal as the most corrupted country in Asia. Reason 2. Nepotism. On social media, young people have been calling out what they call Nepo babies, these children of powerful politicians and business elites. They believe these kids grew up on taxpayers' money. They flaunt their wealth online, LV bags, luxury vacations, expensive watches, while ordinary students can't even find jobs. Shrikala Katewada, a 29-year-old former Miss Nepal, daughter of ex-health minister Birod Katewada, was singled out by protesters as a symbol of elitist privilege. Viral posts showed her travels abroad and luxurious lifestyle. Her family home was amongst those set on fire during the protests. This is Saugat Thapa. He won a major business election largely because his father's influence. Bindu Kumar Thapa was a minister of law, communications, and provincial affairs in Gankara province. And this kind of dynastic politics just reinforces the idea that merit doesn't matter in Nepal, connections do. Reason 3. The economy. 1 in 5 young people in Nepal is unemployed. That's 20.82% youth unemployment, one of the highest rates in Asia. Even for those who do find work, salaries are shockingly low. A law student told reporters he found a job paying less than $140 a month. That doesn't even cover rent in Kathmandu. So what happens? Every single day, thousands of young Nepalis leave the country to find jobs abroad. In fact, remittances, money sent home from workers overseas, now make up 1/3 of Nepal's GDP. That's how reliant the economy has become on people leaving.
All the Nepalese citizens are fed up of corruption. Every youth are going outside the country, so we want to protect our youth and make the country's economy better.
Reason 4. Political instability. To really understand why Nepalese people are so fed up, we need to rewind, not just to last year, not just to the Civil War. We need to go back to when Nepal wasn't even a democracy. Because before 2008, this was a monarchy. For 239 years, Nepal was ruled by kings. The last king was Gyanendra, and by the early 2000s, people were done with royal rule. They wanted democracy. 2 massive movements brought that monarchy down. First, a 10-year Maoist insurgency that killed over 13,000 people. Then, the 2006 Loktantra Andolan, literally the People's Movement for Democracy. And it worked. On May 28, 2008, the monarchy was officially abolished. Nepal became a federal democratic republic. For a moment, it felt like a new beginning. But here's the problem. Since that moment, Nepal hasn't had the kind of democracy people had hoped for. Since Nepal became a democracy, the government has changed hands 14 times. Prime ministers last, on average, less than 2 years. And it's usually the same faces cycling through power. KP Sharma Oli, Pushpa Kamal Dahal, Sher Bahadur Doeba, over and over again, all of them in their 70s. For Gen Z, who make up 56% of the population, this feels like a betrayal of the promises of democracy. Nepal's youth look at this and see a system stuck in the past, dominated by leaders in their 70s, plagued by cryonism and factional fights. And when the government tried to crush that anger with tear gas and bullets, it backfired. It turned frustration into rage. So think about what this looks like if you're 20 years old in Kathmandu today. Your entire adult life, you watch the same corrupt leaders recycle power. You've seen scandals sweep through every major party. You've seen friends and family forced to leave the country just to make a living. And now, on top of that, the government tries to take away the one place where young people do have a voice: social media. And that's why this protest hit so hard. It wasn't just about apps, it was about 17 years of broken promises. So, here we are. The Prime Minister is gone, half the cabinet has resigned, the military has stepped in to restore order. For now, the streets are quieter. But the real question is, what happens next? Option A provisional government. Nepal's parliament doesn't have a majority party right now, so scholars at Kathmandu University say the next thing is some kind of provisional government, a temporary leadership chosen by MPs until new elections can happen. And this is where Gen Z could come in. Because remember, 56% of Nepal's population is under 30. That's more than half the country. If their voices aren't included in this time, protests could flare up again. Some youth groups are already talking about forming their own political movements. Others are rallying around outsiders like the mayor of Kathmandu, a former rapper who's hugely popular amongst young people. There's also talk about respected figures like Nepal's first female Chief Justice, Sushila Karki. Very likely, she'll be the interim head. Option 2, military dominance. But there's another possibility. The army has enormous influence here, and Nepal has a history of relying on the military in times of crisis. Just this week, the army chief warned protesters that if chaos continues, the military will fully mobilize. At the same time, he extended an olive branch, inviting dialogue. So it could go either way, the army as stabilizer or the army as ruler. The biggest challenge right now is that the protests don't have a central leader. They're not being steered by one party, one civic group, or one figurehead. They erupted because everyone was fed up. That makes them powerful, but also fragile. Without leadership, it's harder to negotiate with the government. Still, the fact that thousands of young people voluntarily joined cleanup efforts after the protests, helping soldiers and police clear the streets, shows there's a desire to move forward. And there's something bigger happening here. From Indonesia to Bangladesh to Sri Lanka, we've seen the same thing. Young people demanding an end to corruption, fighting against inequality. It's about a shared global language of rebellion. So when we look at Nepal, it's easy to see this is a small country in chaos, but it's actually part of a much larger story. A story about young people all over the world who feel like their leaders aren't delivering. And when half your country is under 30, ignoring the frustration isn't just risky, it's impossible.
And what I witnessed and what I wanted was the freedom of Nepali youths.
Corrupt politicians must be thrashed out on this parliament and new generation.
And I have an update, guys. So the Chief Justice has now been selected as the interim leader. And it's very interesting where things will go. There will be elections, but these will be in March 2026. So stay tuned, and we're all looking forward to seeing a new Nepal.